If you've been following the reporting we've been doing on People Make Games, you, like me, are now awaiting the results of the employment tribunal between Rockstar and the 31 employees they fired here in the UK. That's set to kick off in September. We will be there to cover it. Now, I'd recommend you watch our earlier videos if you want the specific details, but to give it the shortest possible recap, those fired employees, all members of a union that had not yet been recognised by the company, they say that Rockstar fired them to stop that process in its tracks. This is known as union busting, and Rockstar disputes this accusation outright. It will now be for a judge to rule on whether or not these firings were in fact legitimate. But either way, losing more than 30 people must have proven devastating for this union effort within Rockstar. Not only did they lose almost their entire organising committee in the process, that's the very people pushing the hardest for this unionisation to happen, they also lost a significant portion of the union's total membership, dropping that number below the all-important threshold for statutory recognition. We talked about this process many times now on the channel before, but statutory recognition means that an unwilling employer can be forced to recognise a union thanks to British legislation which basically says, hey, you're going to have to do this, there's loads of them. But by losing 30 or so members in one go, the Rockstar union had dropped well below that threshold once again. So was that it? Was that the end of the line for this possible unionisation of Rockstar Games here in the UK? Well, not quite, because the union today says it has the numbers. In fact, it says it has more members than it's ever had before. With Grand Theft Auto 6 peeking over the horizon, the union are now asking Rockstar to voluntarily recognise their right to represent workers and negotiate on their behalf. In effect, they're saying, hey, you can do this now, quickly and in theory, cleanly, or we're going to go down the statutory recognition route and force you to do it anyway. If they're successful, this would make them only the second recognised union across the entire UK games industry, and they would be by far and away the biggest. History could well be made here. And so I'm back here again at the offices of the Independent Workers' Union of Great Britain to find out what they've heard back from Rockstar so far and whether this is really, actually, finally about to happen. So yeah, the request for voluntary recognition that was sent over at the end of last month, what happened after that?
Okay, so with the voluntary recognition process, there's a couple of different stages that now Rockstar have to abide by. So you have the first 10 days, 10 working days in which Rockstar have to respond, and this sort of triggers the next period, which is a 20-day negotiation period, which we're kind of now entering. We're trying to set up a meeting with Rockstar, which will happen soon. We're hoping that they're going to enter these discussions and engage in good faith. If they don't, we're very happy to kind of use different mechanisms in order to secure recognition, which the workers have decided is what they want.
I guess it's difficult to separate the, this request for recognition with what's happened at the company so far. To what extent is that not hanging over this whole discussion?
We approach all of these things with a very open door strategy. We are very happy to push back if we need to, and hopefully through what they did to those workers, they can see what the IWGB is up for doing, what the workers are up for doing. However, when it comes to recognition, we're hoping that this is a different playing field.
And why now? Why is the request being made at this point? Is it a matter of a certain amount of membership has been reached that gives you the confidence to do that? But why this moment?
Well, there's been an element of rebuilding, obviously, since what happened. There was a chilling effect amongst the workforce, but after that, the workers actually, rather than kind of running away, which might have been what Rockstar hoped for, it's actually helped boost membership, and it's helped not only workers at Rockstar, but beyond this workplace and across the sector understand how important coming together, collectivizing, building this power is. And I think the workers have got to a stage now where they think this is the right next step. I think it's really important to remember that, with union recognition or not, workers can unionize, workers can organize. This is a step that would kind of entrench structures within the company in which workers would have meetings where they could discuss anything from like pay, holidays, overtime, transparency, anything like this. When it comes to voluntary, anything can be on the table, and that's what we need to negotiate.
I understand that one of the fired workers ended up becoming the branch secretary for the Game Workers branch, which does that mean that they were the one that had to send the email to Rockstar asking for voluntary recognition? Is that how that works?
Yeah, so that's exactly how it works. For a lot of the fired workers, I think this is part of the justice that, companies will try moves like Rockstar did and fire people to try and decimate a union. And, we'll go through the tribunal and that will run its course. But for a lot of people, the closure they need is to see that the union is still present far beyond, their presence there. And I think, for many people, that's what this is all about. This isn't about personal battles. This is about building a movement and entrenching these structures within companies that mean workers have more power to have a say in the work they do.
And can you give me just a brief description of what recognition would mean here? And I think you said something interesting before, which was that a union doesn't require recognition in order to enact change and, show its solidarity. It's just a kind of formalization of part of this process. But what does recognition mean in this case? If you could expand on the other power that surrounds that for the union.
Yes, I mean, as I said, and it's the case across not just the game workers sector, it's across many of the sectors we're present in where we might not have recognition. However, we do have very strong unions, we have reps, we have won loads of changes in these different workplaces. However, union recognition can make things easier, they can formalize things, but to be honest, a lot of the time union recognition only sort of activates once the workers are able to show that they mean business, that they have collective power when they sit down at the table. We've seen recognition deals across industries where they're pretty toothless. So I think one of the beauties of the Rockstar recognition when we win it is that it will be backed up by an organised workforce. It will be backed up by a workforce who have seen what Rockstar are capable of and who are ready to fight back, who now have seen their colleagues come together, protest. Many of them have joined their colleagues to protest out the front of buildings. Many of them have been out in the streets of London fighting outside the Take-Two offices. So, they know how to fight. So this recognition should be backed up by an active workforce, and it will mean that there are these structures within the workplace where hopefully regular meetings will happen, where they will be making ground on areas where they feel concessions are needed to be made, and there'll be a dispute mechanism where if things aren't resolved within a reasonable time frame, you can start to exercise that dispute mechanism. You can start moving towards collective action in the form of strikes, protests and stuff like that. So it means that we have a framework, and we would also potentially have facilities time where reps would get paid time in order to kind of support the organising efforts and also be there for other members of the workplace when issues arise. So it just really means that we're very firmly in the workplace, but we already are. So, it's kind of icing on the cake of some of the organising that's already been going on there.
And what would you say your confidence levels are that unionisation or recognition, is going to happen one way or another?
100% confident. I've seen these workers, they've been inspirational, not just for the sector, but across the whole of the IWGB. It's been really galvanizing, and across the world as well. We've seen so much of this support coming in. When these guys commit to something, we know they're going to win. So I'm 100% confident, and Rockstar can either do it the easy way or the hard way. The members are up for either.
Earlier this year, I travelled up to Edinburgh to meet one of the union reps myself. This is a current employee of Rockstar who has stepped into this position despite, to be blunt about it, the company having fired the people doing that exact same work before him. After more than 8 months of reporting this story, this is actually the very first time you're going to see me interviewing a current employee of Rockstar Games on camera. I've certainly been speaking to them along the way, hearing off the record about their union's progress, but nobody has been in a position until today to represent that union publicly. The risk of doing so has felt, frankly, far too high. Because here's the thing, right? Imagine you were involved in this union push yourself and you go to work one morning and watch as more than 30 of your co-workers are fired without warning, escorted out of the office by security and branded with this charge of gross misconduct, something that could make it that much harder to ever land another job in the games industry again. If that was you, if you'd been a part of that union already or were thinking about joining it at some point in the future when all of that went down, well, you'd be pretty freaked out, right? Now, Rockstar claims it didn't know who was and wasn't a union member when it made this decision, despite the gross misconduct it alleges having taken place in a union Discord. But regardless, this show of force must have had a tremendous impact on the members left behind. And so it's not inconceivable to me to imagine a world in which those firings then lead to the eventual disbanding of this union effort altogether, as employees decide that it's simply no longer worth the risk. But again, as you've now heard from the IWGB, this isn't what happened here. So why not exactly? How did the union not only survive, but thrive after witnessing the firings of more than 30 of its members? I met with Nestor Oriata Fernandez, an animation programmer at Rockstar Games, but also a proud union rep for the Rockstar Game Workers Union, to talk about how it feels to be on the front line of this campaign, given the events of the last year. Where are you guys at now?
I can confidently say that the union is much bigger. In fact, it's bigger than has ever been. And we can actually see how the events that happened in October have actually helped in a way to make the union grow, and have definitely tipped people over and have them see the union as a favorable thing rather than something that they might be on the fence of, or they don't quite understand why that might be needed on the workspace. And it just has made us stronger, ultimately.
What was the sort of direct aftermath from your point of view in terms of how the union membership were talking about it, how other employees were feeling about the firings that had happened?
There are people definitely scared. I've had conversations with colleagues where I would encourage them to be, they were sympathetic, like they would think that this is unfair or unjust, but they didn't want to step up because of fear. And ultimately, that's a huge thing to, like, it's fair, it's valid, I understand that. But then it also happened the complete opposite, where people actually saw that and decided to take action and organize and work towards a better workplace. There has to be people to step up to take their place, and I was happy to do that. It only doubled down or made even more clear for me how much a union is needed in the company, and just not the company, the whole industry, because these sort of stories are sadly common.
So what does recruitment look like at the moment? Is it something that you feel comfortable talking about within the office? Are there any kind of actions that you've been able to take within those spaces?
Yeah, thankfully now we've gained some visibility within the workplace, which is great, thanks to leafleting. We are now allowed to, I can proudly say that, we are allowed to put leaflets, union-related leaflets, in the workplace. And that has helped a lot to sort of take out this secrecy around the union and actually like legitimize it and make it like, oh, this is actually a normal thing to be in a workplace.
The leafleting itself, there is a legal right there for you to be able to put them in the workplace, as far as I understand.
I mean, it was an interaction that, so the way it rolled out, it was, I got to know through a colleague in Lincoln that they were allowed to put leaflets from the union in the workplace. And so I emailed the HR department in North asking about that. They replied with the current policy that they have, which goes against any leafleting in general they will have. And we doubled down saying like, but then like the not being able to have union leaflets in the workplace could be also taken as an anti-union stance, and we are entitled to have these sort of things. They replied back saying like, okay, you could guys have it on a designated area on the main building, which we didn't agree to because it sort of defeated the purpose of the leaflets. We wanted to have them on the tea prep areas, which are not work related. And they wanted us to have it in the library, which would effectively affect the visibility of them and how many people would reach out to them. So we said like, no, we would like to do the same thing as in Lincoln, and following their guidelines, which is just having it tidy, professional, and not making a mess. We were then allowed to put them there.
So let me ask about your personal role in that. So you've just described an example where you've needed to contact Rockstar's HR to discuss this and to negotiate on behalf of the union. You yourself are a union rep and are now visible to Rockstar as someone that is organising. How do you personally feel about that in the context of what's happened so far? Do you feel that you're at risk? Do you feel comfortable in that position? I'm interested, on an individual basis, what does it feel like to step into that position, given the particular history of what's happened at this workplace?
As you said, doing this publicly or sort of putting my face out there does also come with a drawback of putting a target on my back. And it is scary, but it's something that it's very much needed. I think the union needs to stop being this concept and actually be people and co-workers that you can see in the office and be like, oh, he is actually from the union. So also because having a face attached to it helps if anyone needs to ask for help. It doesn't become this, oh, I'm just going to submit an email. You can directly go to for someone in the workplace and be like, hey, I actually need help with this because I tried with HR and didn't work out. I need something else. And while scary, makes me proud, I also think I am forever grateful that the trust that people put in me as well, for example, to do this interview. So it has mixed feelings. It is stressful, but it is also extremely rewarding and fulfilling. So.
And my final question just has to do with those union members who were fired. There's a possibility here that Rockstar Games in the UK is going to have a recognised union, that you are going to be successful in your ambitions here, and that union may be able to go on to improve the working conditions of the people who work at Rockstar. That's the dream scenario, I'm sure, for everyone involved. If that were to happen, so many of those original organisers will never really be able to, unless they end up getting brought back to the company in some way, that they themselves personally may not get to benefit from the successes that you may end up seeing. How do you process that? How do you feel about that being the case?
It is melancholic. It has this sort of bittersweet irony to it, where definitely it's a shame that they are not going to enjoy the benefits that we managed to get. In fact, it's already the case. Like, if they were to be in the office and working with us right now for the first time, as far as I know, in the company now we have compensation for overtime. And if they were to be working with us, they would also benefit from that. And that not being the case, it's slightly upsetting, but I think we should also keep focus on the main thing here, which is this goes beyond individual levels. This is actually for the benefit on the well-being of everyone, rather than just individual people. So while it is sad, it is also extremely encouraging to have met these people, how skilled they are, and it's amazing that this snowball that they managed to start to get rolling and now has become massive and doesn't seem to be stopped at any point.
I'd like to end this video by sharing a story that has, as of yet, gone untold when it comes to the Rockstar firings. With the tribunal on its way and union recognition now up for grabs, so much of what's happening here remains undecided. The fired workers could win their case against Rockstar, or they might not. The Rockstar union could achieve recognition, or it couldn't. We're in a state of flux right now as we wait to see where the dust ultimately settles. And although that is true, for some of the people in this story, the events leading into this year have already changed their lives forever. Following his work on the hit indie game Cult of the Lamb, Will Mezzalane was hired as a UI developer at Rockstar Games in 2023. After accepting that job, Will, his partner Steph, and their two dogs, Abby and Lonnie, moved from Melbourne, Australia to Edinburgh, Scotland, some 10,500 miles, in order for Will to be a part of the development of Grand Theft Auto 6. This move, it's crucial to understand, was entirely reliant on a skilled workers visa that was granted to Will by the British Home Office and sponsored by Rockstar Games. After about a year at the studio, Will Mezzalane joined the Rockstar Union and would go on to become a member of its organising committee as well. And then on the 30th of October 2025, Will and 33 of his co-workers were fired. Now, because I was able to access a hard copy of the evidence submitted by Rockstar as part of a preliminary hearing earlier this year, I've actually read the Discord messages submitted by the company as proof of each employee's gross misconduct. And so, before you hear his story, I think it's worth sharing some of Will's messages here so that you can understand what exactly Rockstar saw before deciding to fire him in this manner. In Will's case, he's accused of breaking his contract in 4 distinct ways. First of all, he's been accused of leaking internal work information by discussing the company's annual leave policy. You can see an example submitted as evidence here by Rockstar that reads, "I heard from my lead today that apparently we're being allowed to carry over 10 days of leave from this year into next year, and that carryover does not expire until the end of 2026. I haven't seen anything in writing, but I may ask for it since it would be good to get it confirmed. Maybe folks should reach out to theirs and see what the deal is too." Rockstar also took issue with what it describes as, quote, references to timescales of GTA 6 release/crunch. Examples of this include Will having posted the following message just after an official Rockstar announcement that GTA 6 had been delayed. I think every single person working on the game knew this was the only way it could be. Absolutely massive relief to have it official. On crunch specifically, he later wrote, I would hope most people say no to encouraging overtime, even if it's a little poor form. There's been so many public statements about no crunch, etc. A little bit now turns into a lot next month. And then Rockstar also alleges that Will posted profanity on the Discord, including insulting or offensive comments about colleagues. They also say he made comments that were damaging to the workplace environment, reputation, or public image of Rockstar. I'll focus on the messages they've directly listed as examples of this, which all pertain to a moment following the closure of some social channels on the internal Rockstar Slack. Shortly after an email was sent around to staff detailing this decision, Will wrote the following messages on the Union Discord. They're somewhat out of context because they don't include responses from other Discord members, but these are the ones that Will himself wrote. Did they show any examples of misbehaving, or is this all finger pointing without anything specific? The productivity point is a load of shit and everybody knows it. Oh, get fucked. And not a single person should ever be putting a single extra hour into the workday. He later followed up with this. If delivery of any of our projects suffer, it's not because individuals take seconds out of their day to post about the newest Taylor Swift album, it's because of our chronic inability to plan and finish a project without inflicting misery on everybody involved. Damn, this goes so hard. Again, it's worth restating that Rockstar and the Union dispute the exact role of this Discord and whether or not it can be considered a protected form of Union activity. But let's also not forget something else here. Will was fired for gross misconduct with immediate effect. There was no warning, no slap on the wrist, no discussion until, as you're about to hear, the conversation in which he found out that he was being fired, which lasted something like 2 minutes, according to Will. Do you want to tell me about the day you ended up being fired from Rockstar?
I was actually on leave. I had just had surgery and was currently recovering from that. It was literally just a normal day. I had a nap and I woke up from that nap to lots of messages on my phone from all of my friends saying something's happened. Such and such has been walked out of the building. This person's been fired. I checked my phone. I had a couple of missed calls. I got another call not too long afterwards, and that call lasted roughly 2 minutes. And I was told that I had been dismissed from the company for gross misconduct. Not really given any explanation as to why. That was kind of it.
When did you find out that the Home Office had been contacted by Rockstar?
I tried to follow up with HR at Rockstar to find out, whether they were reporting it straight away or not, whether they were going to be delaying it because of, we now have an employment tribunal involved, because that happened very, very quickly. And I was told that within 2 days of being fired, they had reported it to the Home Office. So my understanding of all of this is that an employer, when you cease your employment for that employer, they legally have 10 days to report to the Home Office that your employment is terminated and they're no longer your sponsor. Rockstar did it in 2. So they did it all very, very quickly. I also learned later that when we consulted an immigration lawyer, that once the employment tribunal got involved and it was the subject of all of, a legal situation, that Rockstar were also supposed to follow up with the Home Office to tell them as such, so that when a Home Office caseworker will then look at your case when it's presented to them, they can use their discretion to not curtail your visa. Unfortunately, Rockstar did not do this.
Now, if you watched our coverage of the interim relief hearing that happened a few months ago, prior to this final tribunal that's coming up in September, you will remember that the union was unable to convince the judge that Rockstar needed to keep the fired employees on its payroll up until that tribunal date itself. One of the side effects of losing that hearing was that there had been a hope that if the union had won, the fired employees who were at Rockstar on a visa, like Will, would have been able to remain in the country. But by losing this interim relief, that hope had been immediately extinguished.
I didn't even actually watch the hearing, to be honest.
Right.
I was in a state of anxiety and, hopelessness that I could not bring myself to do it. The week that it took place and the days after wherein we were waiting for a ruling from the judge was frankly hell.
Off the back of that, you realise your time's up, you need to head back to Australia. What happens next?
Well, first of all, I have a panic attack because reading the email of the decision, I think I got through the first 2 sentences and then just put my phone down and had a bit of a breakdown. I was sitting there on the couch with my dogs and then telling Steph, and it's like I can't, words can't describe how much that hurt. The next step was figuring out logistics, because at that point it's like, okay, we're not in this limbo anymore. It's not a question of if we have to go back to Australia, it's when. And I mean, throughout this entire process, there were attempts made. Like, I tried applying for jobs, I tried seeing if there was a way that we could live in the UK as tourists or something like that and afford to stay there so we could be with our dogs until they traveled home. Nothing worked out, obviously. So we really just had to figure out, okay, what exactly is it that we have to do to go home? Australia has very tight laws when it comes to the import of flora and fauna. Quarantine is very strict. The import of that stuff is very strict. The minimum amount of time that it takes to bring a pet from a foreign country like the UK back into Australia is 6 months. They have to get a test to see if their rabies vaccine is still holding up because the antibodies fade over time. Yeah, it had just been about 2.5 years since they had their initial rabies vaccine before moving to the UK, so it wasn't as strong. So they failed their first test. They had to get revaccinated. They had to wait a month for it to sort of do its thing, get retested, and then once they get a positive test, then a 180-day clock starts. That is a problem, particularly when you have to leave. And we were trying everything when it came to finding someone to care for them. Some people we talked to seemed okay, but then dropped out, or, we didn't quite vibe too well with them. One of our dogs is also a little bit older. So Abby is turning 14, I think, in a few weeks. So she's an elderly dog, and we really were quite worried about her health, honestly. Flying between countries is quite a stressful thing to do for an animal, and we weren't sure whether we were going to have to have her put to sleep because of declining health, her age, whether someone was willing to care for her or not, and whether we were going to have to just give our other dog, Lonnie, to a shelter. So she's 5. So she's young, she's healthy. It would have been extremely upsetting to have to do that. But right at the last minute, I posted on Blue Sky a silly post that was like, do I know anyone who lives in Scotland who would like to look after 2 dogs for 6 months? And someone from Rockstar sent me a message on WhatsApp pretty much straight away saying, hey, I saw your post on social media. You don't have to worry about the dogs. So they stayed with them. They've been staying with them for almost 4 or 5 months now since we've been home. They've been taking such excellent care of them, giving them so much love, and we can't even describe how lucky we are. Like, these guys have quite literally saved their lives. Abby's health has been improving so far beyond what we ever expected. So despite her age now, we have the most confidence ever that, she's actually going to be returning home in one piece. Lonnie would have been fine because she's young and she's healthy, and that really wouldn't have been an issue for her. But the real fear for us was only one of them coming home. And once we had found these guys to look after them, all those fears disappeared.
Well, this is an incredibly shit update to have to add to this interview as we're editing it together after the fact. Towards the end of last month, I received the following message from Will and from Steph, who asked that I share it with you here today. Sadly, a couple of weeks ago, we were informed that Abby and Lonnie's homecoming was delayed by at least another 2 months. Days later, following a vet visit, we've learned Abby will no longer be able to reunite with us in Australia. We've been robbed of a place we called home, of a community we fostered, of livelihoods we earned, and of time. In the 8 months since this all started, we've done all we can to salvage what's left and to keep our family together, and they are family. But now, even that has been taken from us. It's worth me saying at this stage that even if the union wins its tribunal and proves that these firings were unlawful, the lives of the people wrapped up in this mess have been permanently changed by it. There will be no return to normal at the end of this process, not really. And so, in the final moments of our interview from a couple of months ago, I asked Will what his best case scenario was likely to be.
Look, for me, best case scenario, a win means vindication. It means proving that I did absolutely nothing wrong. I don't want to have gross misconduct on my record for the rest of my life. I don't want to have to disclose that I was dismissed for gross misconduct anywhere. That's what it means to me. I'm very fortunate to be employed again. I'm still working in games. I'm very happy. So the things that really matter to me right now is getting my dogs home safe and sound and clearing my name.
We have been committed to covering this Rockstar story as it unfolds here on People Make Games because we think that one way or another, this tribunal ruling is going to have hugely significant implications for the wider games industry. In fact, I've already heard from developers who've been following the events as they've happened and are trying to understand what that means for their own workplace struggles, their own attempts at unionization. We believe this story deserves comprehensive reporting. It requires an investment of time and resources from us to get it right. We couldn't do any of this without the support of our patrons, and so if you'd like to help fund this exact type of games reporting into the future, if you think it matters as much as we do, head over to patreon.com/peoplemakegames to help us do it. Patrons receive access to a range of extra goodies, from companion videos to our big documentaries to behind the scenes updates and bespoke art prints that get sent to your front door. But more than anything, your support allows us to continue to tell the stories that we think we need to tell. Speaking of which, this employment tribunal between Rockstar Games and the fired employees is set to begin in early September and will run for about a month. When that ruling does eventually get made, we will be there to tell you exactly what went down and to give you the opportunity to hear directly from the fired employees and from Rockstar in its aftermath. There's going to be more to come on this channel between now and then, but I think when it comes to this particular story, that's likely to be the next thing you're going to hear from us, and it will be the big one, the ruling itself. We'll see you then.